everybody. Hello. Welcome to the North Carolina Botanical Garden and this wonderful Thursday Lunchbox talk. I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Garden, and we're really excited to have all of you here with us for this special presentation with Basil Camu. In the back of the room, I have Kristen Hieronymus with me as a special guest today helping us with moderation. So thank you, Kristen, for being here. And we're happy to have you all here, as well as the folks on Zoom. Next slide, please. Wanted to take just a moment and thank our fall 2024 Lunchbox Talk event sponsors at the Dogwood level. Thank you to Dr. Jennifer Runquist and Dr. Al Runquist for your support of this programming this fall. We're really grateful for that support. So this is a special lecture today, not only because it's a very special guest to us here at the Garden from our friends at Leaf and Limb, but we're also kicking off a new themed program series in partnership with the New Hope Audubon Society. And so with the New Hope Bird Alliance. Thank you. And we're really excited for this partnership. We've been working for the last few months to move this all forward, and we have special guests from New Hope, Barbara Driscoll, to share more about the program and to introduce our speaker.
Hi, New Hope, I'm Barbara Driscoll. I'm the co-chair for our bird-friendly habitats, and we do yard certifications, just if you're interested. New Hope Bird Alliance, it's our new name. We just changed our name, is excited to once again partner with the North Carolina Botanical Garden on programming to help save birds. With Basil's talk, we're kicking off bird-friendly landscapes, cultivating habitats, connecting lives. It's a series of programs and an educational exhibit designed to foster a deeper understanding and appreciation of intricate links between native plants, insects, and birds. The series aims to provide meaningful learning experiences, promote sustainable practices, and Basil's going to be talking about some of that, and raise awareness about the importance of preserving and promoting native plants, habitats, and their connection with birds. So the series will run this fall through the spring in 2025, including Lunchbox talks, self-guided tours, bird walks, gardening workshops, art classes, and more. So, and we're also going to be doing a photo exhibit in January, so please look to the website and submit your photos for the community photo exhibit, which will be very exciting. And then Joanne is actually going to introduce Basil. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. Again, very excited for this partnership. So this talk is about a new book, and we actually have some here in the room, and Basil will be selling those via cash after the presentation and can sign those for you as well. And he has dropped some off in our garden shop, and those will be available for sale later today as well. So we're excited about this book. So without further ado, let me introduce our special guest. Basil loves trees. He calls himself a treecologist. He also loves soil, wildflowers, insects, bats, fungi, basically everything to do with terrestrial ecosystems. He is fully committed to caring for this beautiful planet. This makes it such a beautiful partnership with the garden, doesn't it? He's a treecologist, ISA, board certified master arborist, Duke graduate, and wizard of things at Leaf and Limb. Though trees are his passion and profession, he also loves tending to native flowers in his garden, growing Piedmont prairies, and propagating plants from seeds. And so you'll hear all about this passion in this talk. Basil, I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Thanks for having me, y'all. I really am excited to be here. I love talking to people who love the same things I do. Makes it fun. All right. I'm going to put on the slideshow presentation. Hopefully this works. Does it look good on your side? Oh, no, I got to share screen. Let's try that. That might help. Here we go. How's that? Perfect. I like to wander around a little bit. I don't like to be tied down by a podium unless I need to be for Zoom people. Do I need to stay behind this, or can I move around?
Within a couple feet of.
Okay, all right. It seems that I'm tied down today. That's okay. All right, so this is off the cuff. Well, first of all, thanks for being here. My name is Basil. I'm one of the owners of Leaf and Limb. We are at our core a tree care company, but we're also now a company that will get rid of your grass in exchange for native meadows. We plant what we call Piedmont prairies, but these are essentially native meadow ecosystems, so native grasses, native flowers. We swore we'd never get into landscaping. It's kind of true. We kind of held to our promise because we're the anti-landscaper. We're getting rid of your grass. But it goes really well with trees, actually. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I did want to do one off the cuff. It's sort of worth noting that I think a love for birds and a love for native plants has a direct bridge to other environmental issues. Because if you think about a plant, at its core, it's a carbon pump. It pumps carbon from the sky, and then it puts that carbon into its own body, but actually it gives away most of that carbon. Most of it's going into the ground to feed life in the soil, which we'll talk about. And then a lot of that goes into its leaves to feed caterpillars and insects. So we know that native plants feed more life above and below ground in their native ecosystems. So if you want to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, then native plants are your best plant for doing so. So there's a really strong bridge there. If stormwater is your thing, well, native plants build healthy soil faster. So we're going to talk a little bit about these bridges into how all these connect. But I just wanted to note that I think caring for our native birds and our migrating birds is a really wonderful way to care for the planet. All right, so this is all based on a book. And this is the book, the agenda. I love alliteration, so here you go, some fancy alliteration. We're going to sort of talk about the premise, sort of the basic systems. We're going to talk about the problems, how we're killing those systems, the path, how we can move forward and help heal those systems, and then the promise. What happens if we do these things? All right, so these systems are tried and true for millennia. We know that trees have been evolving for a very long time. Our ecosystem has been a long, long time. So it's worth noting that these systems really, really do work. I want to just give you a quick waltz through these basic systems that underlie our discussion today. So first we have photosynthesis. Everything we're talking about, I'll just say there's a lot more detail. It's in the book, it's online, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially photosynthesis is what turned this from a planet full of rocks into a planet with soil and a living ecosystem. They are the terraforming agent that paved the way for terrestrial life. It started with lichen, and now we have trees and flowers and ferns and grasses. These are advanced forms of that very early journey. And what's so beautiful about that is we have this giant thermonuclear reactor sitting out in space 93 million miles away, providing an abundant amount of free energy for us, and plants figured out how to harness that energy and turn it into life. And carbon plays a really important role in creating that life, which we'll talk about briefly in just a minute. The second part is soil. So when plants began this progression of breaking down sand, silt, and clay, which is what covered Earth, they also infused life into that soil. So it might have been dead remains of something that was once living, or it may be an actual living creature. But life is what turns dirt into soil. So we have sand, silt, and clay. That's dirt. Add life. Now we have soil. Soil is also what unlocks the chemical properties for plants. So when we're thinking about fertilizers, which we'll get to, plants don't need fertilizers. They need life to unlock the nutrients from the sand, silt, and clay. That's how plants feed. The other part is life gives soil structure. It's the tunneling, it's the digging, it's the predation, it's the dyeing, it's the aggregates and the secretions. This is what gives soil structure. So when we think about, soil is typically taught in sort of three ways: structure, chemical properties, and biology. And typically biology has sort of gone down at the bottom, insignificant, but really biology is what drives it all. Biology gives you, it unlocks your chemical properties, and it unlocks your structure. When we're talking about fresh water, you have to have soil to hold water. You can think about soil like a sponge. It really is that. It holds water. Much like your sponge, when there is no water in the sponge, there's open air spaces. Soil's the same, healthy soil. So when I say soil, again, it's sand, silt, and clay plus life. Then what's really cool is plants rooted in this soil sponge that's full of water, and we're talking about a healthy ecosystem, of course. Plants are what move it around. There's some really fascinating ways that plants move water around. They're very critical to water distribution across terrestrial land. I would recommend The Hidden Life of Trees. I'd recommend reading Water in Plain Sight by Judith Schwartz. These are incredible books about how water moves around the planet. But for example, if you don't have trees spanning from bodies of water inland, water doesn't move inland. When you have trees that bridge the gap between, say, a body of water inland or an ocean, the trees facilitate the movement of that water. It's very cool how that works. It's in the book. I don't want to go into too much detail in this lecture. We could actually do a whole lecture just on water cycles. They're pretty fascinating. And then I've sort of alluded to this earlier, but when all of this is working, these plants feed a tremendous amount of life. Everything on terrestrial land either eats plants directly or eats something that eats plants. So plants are this, again, they're this agent that capture free energy from the sky and turn it into a usable form for all of us, all life on land. I also think it's interesting when you start examining just sort of the human economy, how much of our economy is based on either plants currently or the remains of plants. You can start looking down some really big sectors like energy. What is energy? Pretty much just using fossil fuels, which is the remains of plants. Plastic, what is plastic? It's a byproduct of fuel made from old plants. What do we build our houses with? Either wood or concrete. Concrete requires energy from plants. Medicine, nearly half of our medicines are derived from plants, or if they aren't currently derived from plants, they once were, and that's where we originally found them. You can think about opioids, for example. It's pretty fascinating. You start looking around a room and you start thinking, okay, what are the origins of that item, or how did we make that item? It's going to trace back to plants in some way because they're what capture energy. And then finally, we get to carbon. This is what kind of brings it all together. I mentioned this earlier. Plants are the pumps that bring down carbon from the sky. If we go back to the Carboniferous period, we know that there was about 1,500 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And during the course of the Carboniferous period, there was an explosion in plant life. There was an explosion in all the other life that ate plants or ate something from plants. And during that time span, our atmosphere went from 1,500 parts per million down to 200 parts per million, where it stayed for a very, very long time until just recently, actually. All that plant life was so abundant that it made huge deposits of dead plant matter that are now where we harvest our oil. So Carboniferous period was the showcase for what plants do. They pull down carbon from the sky. They store it in the soil. They store it in life. I like questions midway through. I don't like to wait till the end. Any questions so far on just sort of these basic systems? I try to just give you a quick skim through these topics. What questions do you have? And should I take questions online as well? I think I should. No. Yes? Do you want to moderate that? Perfect. Any questions here in person? Oops. Sorry. Go ahead.
You mentioned a book by Judith Schwartz.
Yes, called Water in Plain Sight.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great book about water. Really fascinating. And it intersects, of course, with soil, trees, and life because they're unavoidable. Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of things are derived from plants, the energy that we use. How do metals fit into that overall picture? So I was thinking about resources. I mean, they're also related to plants in some way.
Yeah, I don't think, obviously the metal itself is derived from the supernova that formed our solar system, but like in terms of smelting and actually using them, we do need energy. As of 2000, and I guess it was 2 years ago, something like, I don't have the stat in front of me, but it was either 89 or low 90% of all energy use worldwide is still based on fossil fuels. Substantial. Great questions. Other questions?
We do have a Zoom question.
Okay. Oh, and I'll start repeating the question for Zoom folks. Sorry about that.
Right. They're asking, what about native cultivars? Do they benefit the same way as natives?
Question is regarding native cultivars versus natives. I'm just going to let all my biases hang out. I think with native plants, might as well just go collect the seeds. We can find them here locally, so why even mess with a cultivar? We can collect native seeds and grow them ourselves, very easy. We'll talk about that a little bit, but I don't really have a good answer for that. But I'm always a little wary of us tinkering with the plant mechanisms. I think there's probably too many variables for us to anticipate. So I can't really answer the question, but I can say that I would much prefer a full-on native collected from a wild seed. We're going to have genetic diversity. It's just going to be a more resilient plant. Other questions? Okay, well, now we are in the problem section, unfortunately. So we've just talked about these vital ecosystems, and let me move this out of my way here. Well, unfortunately, that plant community we were talking about, we've cut down half of all trees and grasslands. So our photosynthetic capability on this planet is cut in half. We're just, crippling this system in its knees. Talking about topsoil, in just the last 150 years, we've denuded the planet of half of its topsoil. Just in the 1900s, there were 1 billion acres of land farmed into destitution that have since just been left abandoned. Nothing's happening on that land. Water's running out. I mean, these are headlines that are becoming more and more frequent. Right now, Mexico City facing serious water crisis. Multiple cities in Turkey, India, South Africa was rationing water a few years ago. NASA's been looking at our big aquifers. We have about 37 major aquifers here on Earth, and 21 of them are running out too fast to be replenished. It's pretty terrifying, y'all. If we run out of oil, it's one thing. Running out of water is a whole different situation. If we're talking about life, we've seen just in our lifetime for some of us, just in the last 40 years, there's been a 60% decline in populations of birds, animals, insects, you name it. And that's just in the last 40 years. It really sort of doesn't even look at what happened before that. I get into this a little bit in the book, but we can't forget the preceding 50,000 years of human history, where every continent we entered, we killed off the keystone megafauna. And those are your ecosystem engineers. When you lose your megafauna, your ecosystems collapse. These are the life that hold entire ecosystems in place. So it's really hard to even estimate the damage we did in the preceding 10 to 50,000 years before just quote unquote modern civilization. And then we talk about this one a lot. So we know that there's been a huge rise in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's 40% just in the last 200 years. We were talking about those parts per million. I don't know what the current tally is today, but we're well above 400, and now we're pushing into 500. We know the planet could go up to 1,500. It was that in the Carboniferous period. It's not a good scenario for anybody. But I think it's an interesting thought experiment to consider the rise of CO2 more as a symptom of a really much worse issue versus the cause of any issues. Now, we can talk about fossil fuels. There's no need to do that today because it's well trodden. But I'd instead point your attention to more of these lesser talked about systems: soil, photosynthesis, life, the role they can play in pulling down carbon. So when we're talking about having lost half of the world's forests and grasslands, half of the world's soil, is it really any surprise that CO2 is running rampant in the atmosphere right now? The pumps that are supposed to bring it down and the places that it brings it down to, they're all broken. So of course we have a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we shouldn't demonize carbon. It's a great thing. We're all built of carbon. Our whole terrestrial ecosystem is built of carbon. The planet knows what to do with carbon if we just get out of the way and stop breaking the systems that actually use the carbon for life. That's sort of the summary of that section. A little depressing. We're going to get to some hope, things you can do that help birds and help the planet. They're the same things, which is cool. First, I want to pause for some questions, though. We're going to have 4 sections, and we'll do 4 sets of questions. Yeah.
Would you elaborate on megafauna?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, the question is, can you please elaborate on megafauna? There's a lot written on this. I'd recommend Dan Flores wrote a book called Wild New World that I really like. There's a lot of really good books on this topic, but essentially, you can think about, say, I'm going to use it like mastodons and woolly mammoths, for example. They were very crucial in keeping mesquites out of the Great Plains. So when the mastodons were killed off, the Great Plains began dying off because the creatures that helped cultivate the conditions necessary for those Great Plains had changed. That is one example, and most continents have something like 30 to 50 keystone megafauna that played similar roles in their ecosystems. We could even look at a smaller ecosystem engineer. It wouldn't be classified as megafauna. We have very few megafauna these days. Some of our last remaining are the elephants in Africa. They still play this role. They help create these places where water is captured and soil builds. So they create what is the African landscape. But here in North America, we've been learning a lot over the last 50 years about the role that beavers play. And beavers are an ecosystem engineer. They're super important. There's some really great books written on this topic. Ben Goldfarb wrote a book about beavers that's really a great book, and just showing, there's several books on this topic, showing the way that when beavers slow down the flow of water, how that water is able to saturate into the land, which fosters better soil, more carbon capture, more life, and then that gives rise to many different types of species. I'll use one other example that's also not megafauna and also not a beaver. This is the gray wolves in Yellowstone. When they, essentially we hunted the gray wolf out of existence in the lower 48s. Back in the, I would say late 80s, the folks at Yellowstone realized like, hey, maybe we need to bring wolves back into this ecosystem and see what happens. When they brought the wolves back into the ecosystem, the wolves were able to hold the caribou and elk populations at bay. That meant less of the plants near river sources were being chewed too low, so they grew up. That helped create conditions that favored the beaver. Now all of a sudden water's slowing down. There's a resurgence of life. Birds are moving in because the species they need to feed are now present. And we see this multiplying effect happening with these second, third, and fourth order variables that were impossible to predict. And we're still seeing outcomes from this today. It's really exciting work. But that's essentially how keystone species influence their ecosystem, and they bring about huge diversity.
I have a question from online. Running out of water is something I struggle to understand. If water is a renewable resource, how are we losing it? Is it being lost in the sense of escaping the atmosphere, or is it lost in the sense of usable water is lost?
It's a great question. And I assume I don't have to repeat it because you're on the mic, right? Perfect. Yeah, water doesn't leave our system, but the problem is it's not necessarily available to us. So I'll give you a good example just from here in North Carolina, just from here locally. Wake County, over the last 10 years, cut down 11,000 acres worth of space, trees that they graded. Orange County, Durham County have similar stats. It turns out all of North Carolina has similar stats. So what happens now is when it rains, that water does not percolate in the ground like it used to. Instead, it washes downhill, and this is why we're seeing eastern North Carolina get crushed with flooding every single time we have any kind of rain event here in either the Appalachians or the Piedmont. So keeping this explanation just very simple, what the water does is it moves faster across the land. It shoots down the land, evaporates back up. There's another piece of this puzzle, which is when the water is not saturating into the land, you get heat domes. And these heat domes build and build and build, and it's harder for normal rain patterns to enter. There's fewer trees to pull the rain patterns in. Now only the most violent storms are able to enter. And that's why here in North Carolina, we're increasingly seeing these crazy afternoon thunderstorms or these crazy systems that move through. And it turns into a cycle of where the water is moving faster and faster across the land and through the sky, but it's not getting into the ground. Alan Savory has done great work on this topic, and he has this quote that I love, which is, drought does not produce bare ground, but bare ground produces droughts. And that's spot on. That's how it works. And while your water's cycling, more and more of your aquifers are running low. We're pulling it out for irrigation, for other things. So, even when you see local reports saying, oh, Falls Lake has X number of feet, all is good, we're out of the drought, it's not really true. We on the tree side are seeing what the suburban space looks like, and I can tell you right now, it's super dry. There's not a lot of water in the land right now. We're seeing trees die in record number right now. It's out of control. Yeah, the lake's got water, but that's because it's a big dam meant to catch all that runoff. It's not actually getting into the land. There's no sponge to hold it. That's sort of the medium length reply to that. All right, great questions. Let's move on. This is the good part. I'm not here to depress you. I'm here to give you hope. Hope and action. I get tired of being depressed and not given solutions. I'm going to give you solutions. So essentially, the answer is we can work with natural systems. Let's do what nature does. Let's lean into things that we know to be true. We can look to the Carboniferous period for inspiration. We can look to photosynthesis, soil formation, you name it. These are systems we can tap into. And the cool thing, this is sort of the premise for my book, when you do tap into these systems, you end up saving time and money. So you can do all of this and not care a lick about the planet. As long as you care about your time and your money, you're going to like this. And if you do care about birds in this case, or the planet in general, well then great. So one thing is we need to plant more native trees. That's an easy one. We know the role they play now. They play an outsized role in photosynthesis. They're better at photosynthesizing than grasses and flowers. And I'm here to tell you that young native saplings, 1- and 2-year-old saplings, are the best thing you can plant. Not only are they way easier to plant, saving you time and money, but they establish faster. They don't have issues with the root systems. They don't have the diseases that often come out of nurseries. There's a litany of reasons to plant 1- and 2-year-old saplings. The only drawback is you have to be careful about damage. But to that end, you can take a 4-foot section of landscape cloth or whatever your preferred protection mechanism is, roll it into a hoop, zip tie it, and set it around your plant with some little sod staples on the sides to keep it in. And you'll be safe now from the deer or whatever you might have in your area.
Could you say that one more time? That last tip. Or is that in your book?
It's in the book. Yeah. What I said is essentially the saplings, the big drawback is you do need to protect them. And to that end, you can take a section of chicken wire or landscape cloth, whatever metal fence construct you want. At about 4 feet, if you put it in a hoop and join the ends, then you can zip tie those ends together and set it around the plant as protection. Yeah, it's great. I talk a little fast sometimes. So we already talked about this a little bit, but I'm a big fan of native plants because they feed more life here. It takes a long time to learn. You know, a caterpillar can't just walk up to any tree and eat those leaves. You might think like, oh, it's a leaf. Caterpillar can eat it. Not so. It takes hundreds of thousands of years for those caterpillars to evolve and to be able to overcome the plant's defense. A plant doesn't want to get eaten. It has all kinds of toxins that kill off insects. Plants do all kinds of fancy things. They'll signal to parasitic wasps that, hey, I've got caterpillars on my leaves. Come eat some caterpillars. And the parasitic wasps will come in and start parasitizing the caterpillars. So they have really elaborate defense mechanisms. It takes a long time to develop these relationships where insects can actually feed from plant leaves. Ditto for birds and these other insects, other creatures. So we want the native plants because they're our native insects, our native birds, they are adapted and evolved to be able to eat from those species. They cannot necessarily do that from species that come from other ecosystems. So if you care about wildlife, that's great. If you care about carbon, that's great. We're getting more carbon into the local ecology. I love the, okay, let me show you some shots, by the way. These are native saplings. These are ones we actually grow at Project Pando. You can just look at that beautiful root structure, all those aggregates around there, lots of fungi and bacteria. This is just a beauty. There's me holding one. That's a 1-year-old sapling. In the book and later today, I'll teach you some easy methods for growing your own saplings. Also, I know that NC Botanical Garden has some great plant sales where they sell young plants like this. These are the ones you want. Here's another of my favorites, save existing trees. This is such an easy way to save your money. So much money gets poured into tree removal because there's so much fear out there about things that simply aren't true. Or you might even be encountering an unethical company that wants to cut your tree down, tells you it has to be cut down, but really it doesn't. You know, a little baby hollow in the side, who cares? These are the reasons people are told your tree has to be cut down. I've been doing this for about 17 years. We're a company of about 55 right now. We've done a lot of meetings for a lot of tree removal appointments. And I can tell you just across our company, we think that about 9 times out of 10, a tree does not actually need to be removed. It either has no problems or there are much easier ways to solve the issues. And y'all, a tree like this, the only way you get that tree is time. No money in the world can buy this tree. Jeff Bezos and his $100 gazillion cannot buy that. He cannot command a young oak sapling to grow to this size. You cannot transplant that tree. So only time can replace these things. And it's worth noting that mature trees provide exponential benefits. They're not better benefits, they're exponential benefits. It's a great way to save time and money and help heal for local ecology. We're going to go through about half this list, and then I'll stop for questions. All right, so pruning. There's really only one kind of pruning that actually matters. It's called structural pruning. And structural pruning is what gives your trees strength. Now, maybe you need to clear some branches away from your house. That's reasonable. Maybe there's some dead branches you're worried could fall and hurt your children. All reasonable things. But if you want to invest in your tree's health, it's structural pruning. And the reason structural pruning matters is you can imagine trees growing in their normal ecosystem. They grow with other trees. When they're growing with other trees, they're competing for sunlight. They tend to grow straight and tall with well-spaced branches, single trunks typically. That is a strong tree. In the suburban space, they have too much sunlight available. They grow fat and happy, lots of trunks, lots of overextended branches. We can call it tree obesity if you want to. Our role as arborists and your role as caretakers of your young trees is to perform structural pruning. This is a great way, the average lifespan of a tree in the suburban landscape in the US is 35 years, which is really unfortunate because in nature, it's substantially more. A red maple can easily live 500 years. An oak tree can easily live 1,000 years. Loblolly pines, 500 years, no problem. These are normal lifespans for a tree. To only be getting an average of 35 years out of suburban trees is really, it's a real opportunity cost. We're missing on these mature trees that can do exponential healing for our planet. I'll show you a few things. Now, I'm also going to mention this just obligatory because every arborist always feels obliged to mention this. Do make a good pruning cut. That's the basis for good structural pruning. You can't just cut branches. I think everybody here knows this. I'm definitely not going to spend time on that. Just a little example here. This is a tree we've been caring for. This is a pruning cut we encountered, and here we are 13 years later. Check that out. It still has not closed. This rotting column has extended now into the trunk. And over time, give it another 13 years or maybe another 30 years, the tree will unfortunately fail because the way this cut was made. But to illustrate structural pruning, check this out. This is a red maple. Both pictures are a red maple. One is a red maple I found in Umstead. Look at that trunk. It's perfect. Straight, tall, lots of well-spaced branches. Check out the normal maple. You might even think the maple on the right is what a maple is supposed to look like because you've seen it so frequently, but it's not. That maple is one that has too much sunlight and did not receive structural pruning as a young tree. So in the suburban landscape, if we can train our trees to look like this tall and straight maple, we can maybe give that tree an extra 100 years. All right, I'm going to do the soil segment and then I'm going to pause for questions. So when we talk about structural pruning, we're talking about stability in the face of storms and high winds. It's not necessarily health, that's stability and strength. But when we're talking about soil, we're talking about health. So the second really important aspect for caring for these photosynthesizing machines is get really healthy soil. And it's not fancy. Healthy soil is easy. Here's things we do. We use arborist wood chips. They're free from any tree service in this area. You can also go to a website called chipdrop.com and get them for free. I actually could legitimately do a whole hour lecture on the merits of arborist wood chips over all other forms of mulching. I'll just leave you with a few highlights though. Number one, they're free. Number two, they provide more diverse set of food for a more diverse set of fungi and bacteria. Number three, they don't become waterproof. Your triple and double shredded mulches do become waterproof, which means now your tree's not getting water. And then from sort of a carbon footprint standpoint, a arborist wood chip is a branch or a trunk that's gone through a chipper once. Double shred means it goes through twice. Triple shred means it goes through 3 times. So you're using 3 times more fuel for your triple shredded mulch that harms your tree and does not benefit the soil and costs you money. Here's another one of those, saving you time and money. Don't leave your leaves under the tree. If you don't want them on your grass, that's fine. Rake them under your trees. I mean, this is how trees feed themselves. You have to remember that trees were feeding themselves just fine for about 400 million years before we humans came along. It's sort of classic human ego to think that they needed us to rake their leaves away. They really don't. I'll get to questions. So leave your leaves. We can talk also about how insects overwinter. This is a huge benefit for birds. I hope it goes without saying, anything we're talking about today is a benefit to birds. A rising tide lifts all boats. Since this is a bird-themed series. All right, leave the leaves. We're almost done with this one. Also, this is just rotten leaves and pine straw. It's called leaf mold. Leaf mold then becomes leaf compost. It's the easiest thing you can make. You can just take a rake a pile of leaves, walk away for a year, come back, leaf mold. Walk away for another year, come back, leaf compost. And it's amazing. It's really great stuff. If you want the best compost for your plants, that's it. And then if you want to get fancy and spray your plants with the compost, you can make what's called compost tea. It's not actually that. That's just a fun photo. But compost tea is this in a mesh bag, dunked in a 5-gallon pail of water or whatever pail of water you have. Do that for 5 minutes. Much like tea, take your tea bag out, and then you can just pour your liquid around whatever you want. And if you like your sprayers and you want to run it through a sprayer, you can do that too. And then last but not least on this topic, when you do use your arborist wood chips, not your triple showed mulch, which that is, just don't do this. This is called a mulch volcano, and when we bury the bottom of a tree, it just cannot withstand that. Roots were meant to stay underground, stay wet. Trunks were meant to stay above ground, stay not wet. And this sort of ruins that whole situation by keeping the trunk wet. That's the simple explanation, but it will kill your tree very quickly. All right, now we'll do questions. Go ahead.
Well, this is a simple one. Is it better to blow your leaves to where you want them or rake them for
It's up to you.
the bees?
I mean, if we're talking strictly carbon footprint, rake is better, but then we got to really get into how many calories are you expending? You could really get nitty gritty on your carbon expenditure here, but in general, raking is probably better. It's exercise and it's less emissions and it's less poison that comes from the blower. I'd say electric blowers are going to be better than a gas blower.
You have solar panels.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you're running off solar panels, electric blowers are essentially free. Electric tools are getting to be really good these days. So I would recommend an electric blower if you want to blow, and then I enjoy raking just for the exercise. But it doesn't really matter.
Standpoint of like larva or cocoons that might be.
I'm not aware of there being any research on a difference there. I wouldn't imagine and by the way, the question was, should you rake your leaves or blow your leaves? I'm going to do a better job remembering that.
We have an online question. How do you slow the water down on an individual basis in our yards to help the water saturate the land instead of running off into the storm drains?
Planting plants does that. In my backyard, we're going to talk about Piedmont prairies here in just a minute. Trees, doesn't matter. They're all pulling down substantial amounts of water. If you're focusing on the things we're talking about now, water retention is a natural byproduct. If you want to get real fancy, you could also do berms and swales and capture that water to let it sink into your land. But at a simple level, doing the things in this conversation today all have that desired outcome.
I'll just add that if you leave your leaves, leaves can absorb up to 2 inches of water too, so that slows the flow on your property.
Perfect. That's great. Yes.
Is pine straw the same as leaves, or is that two separate?
Question is pine straw the same as leaves? And the answer is essentially yes, it's rotting stuff. If it rots, it makes soil.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with pine straw. And when we talk about pH, I could do another lecture on pH. I have real problems with pH. pH is meant to be measured in a liquid solution. Soil is not a liquid solution. That's problem one. Problem two, we know that plants buffer their pH in what's called the rhizosphere, which is this very tiny millimeters wide section around their roots. And they do that with the help of beneficial bacteria and fungi. So the whole idea of plant pH is based on real loose science at best. Yes, go ahead.
With arborist mulch, what about I've heard that you can transport pests and diseases to your yard using arborist mulch.
I would say if there are invasive pests that we're worried about and there are county restrictions on transporting wood and wood chips across lines, we should be careful. But particularly here at this point, emerald ash borer, for example, is very well saturated. You're not going to have to worry about that. So that's the invasive pest category. Then for your normal everyday pest issues, like let's say a rust fungus or a cherry leaf spot fungus, these spores float for miles and miles. So really the truth of the matter is trees are kind of like humans in that if we're always we're always subject to getting a cold or getting COVID or getting flu. These viruses are prominent. Our best bet as humans is stay healthy as we can so our immune system can buffer against those viruses. Trees are very similar. The healthier you can keep those trees, the more likely they are to be able to resist what are always a constant onslaught of pest attacks. So really any possible little damage that maybe wood chips might do by bringing in a spore of some kind are far offset by the ways in which they enhance the tree's immune system. I'm using air quotes because it's a little different for a tree. Same concept though.
Basil, I see at least 3 hands in the room here, here, and
Perfect.
here.
Let's get some more questions. I love questions.
Okay, on that tree that has that limb cut off with the large amount of water entry, why don't you just redo that even if you have to cut into the branch collar? Why don't you recut it and canoe the cut and maybe even put something in there to stop the water flow?
Because we can't stop decay. Decay is this thing.
Oh, yeah, I'm talking about, you know, when it was earlier, but you're saying the decay is now so far into that tree?
Or what should have been done is that if the cut had been made at the appropriate place, the tree would have actually sealed itself off and decay would have subsided. But now it's too late. There's no way to stop it. There was an era where folks put concrete and rubbers and stuff in trees thinking that would stop it. None of that works. The short version is you can't stop decay.
Right.
When this is happening, yeah.
Right, it would have to be earlier on.
And really, even then, we can't stop it. But if we give the tree its ability to stop it, which is the branch collar, that branch collar is what is it is able to stop the decay, then it could have saved itself.
Question here. Yeah, what about, for instance, in my neighborhood, we're having problems
speaker
with
here.
pine beetles?
There you go.
Okay, so in my neighborhood, we're having problems with pine beetles, and they're taking on these trees. The pine beetles are already infected. You know, is that safe to use in my yard, or do I need to worry about?
As long as your trees are in good health. But again, pine beetles swarm for miles, tens, hundreds of miles. So your trees are always in danger. Your best approach is to keep them as healthy as possible. And at their highest potential to be healthy, they're not going to have a problem, generally speaking. Yeah. Also, in terms of pine beetles, yeah, there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down. I'm not going to, we'll skip that for now.
You had mentioned the shorter lifespan of trees in the suburban environment, and is that related to improper care, removal for utilities, or lack of space to spread out, topsoil removal for suburban building, or all of the above?
I would primarily say it's a result of topsoil removal and then a lack of focus on recreating topsoil, and then not paying enough attention to pruning trees for structure. You need strength, you need healthy soil. Those are your top two. I'd say that's 80% of the problem.
Is there something you can do to get builders to stop doing topsoil?
The question was, is there anything we can do to stop builders?
Of course, there is.
Taking the topsoil.
Absolutely. You just have to shift market preferences. It's a big challenge, shift paradigms. So, you know, this book aims to help shift paradigms, and I know that we're all engaged in work that helps to shift these paradigms. So I guess keep doing what you're doing. I think the local elections matter a lot. Local bonds matter a lot. County commissioners matter a lot. There's a lot of really key positions to be thinking about in local elections that do influence those decisions. So, you know, the other thing worth noting about this is every county and city is governed by a set of documents called either a Unified Development Ordinance or a Land Development Ordinance. Every county around here and city around here has one. That's where the magic happens. So if you really want to get involved, you want to go to your city council and you want to start petitioning for changes in the UDO or the LDO or whatever the acronym is for your area. And that's where developers are held accountable. So I'd say the ballot box is a good place to start, local ballot box. And then I'd also say where you spend your dollars is a good place to start.
I see and I know all of us see so many professional landscape companies who come and practice volcano mulching or use leaf blowers, and by the end of summer or the end of fall have blown everything up to create. It started out flat, but by the end of the season, it's a volcano mulch. And I wonder if you could speak to how is the level within the educators and within the landscape and, within those fields, those professional, do you see it increasing?
There's always really complex answers to these questions. They're never as easy as you might think. Yes, you're right. Part of the problem here is that typically in a new community, I should also add your question about why trees live such short lifespans. My answer was more for established trees. For new trees, I'd say one of the top reasons they don't make it is improper planting. Improper planting is challenging. The video that we made on YouTube, you can go check it out. It's 27 minutes long. And part of that is because of the way that nurseries grow trees. They put them in containers, they dig them out of fields, so you have these handicapped root systems. If you go to most nurseries, the root collar is already buried in the pot. So we have huge structural issues in the nursery industry. Then you get to the construction industry. Landscaping is your last portion of what's done. We're usually behind budget, behind schedule. So it's like, hey, go get the cheapest trees you can, get them in the ground. We don't even care about anything as long as they look good and then the homeowner can deal with it. So just anecdotally speaking, every new HOA I've been in, there's like $50,000 in hidden costs that the buyer might not be aware of related to the house and the landscape. So there's huge structural issues in the construction industry. And then you swing over to the landscaping industry. Most landscapers are relying on H-2B visa workers who are only here for 8 or 9 months a year. They're not getting training. There's also a race to the lowest price point in the industry. So you can't invest the time you need to train your staff on how to do it and then actually do the planting properly. So the net result is that nobody knows how to plant trees properly. Nobody knows what a proper planting looks like. And we have trees that are dying in the suburban landscape. These are huge things. So all that on this, what seems like a simple premise, plant the tree properly. People always wonder, why is leaf and limb so expensive on tree planting? We're not. It just takes us 3 times longer because we're doing proper protocol. It's pretty frustrating, honestly, which is why we think saplings are the future. Just get away from it all. Let's just use saplings. Saplings change everything. Going all the way back, nurseries can grow them more easily. They won't have mangled root systems. Construction companies would sure be happy because it's cheaper and they're easier to plant. And then the landscapers, if they want to plant them, well, you don't have to do much training. You can drive the shovel in the ground, make sure you get the roots in and not the branches. It's much simpler. And the net result is it was less energy and money to grow the tree. The tree's more likely to succeed. So it's just a win-win. This is where saplings are really, I think, a game changer.
Basil, 2 questions online.
Yeah.
Quick one, resources for arborist wood chips?
Chipdrop.com.
All right.
Call your favorite tree service, they'll give them to you for free, usually.
Thank you. And the other, for those who want to change their yards to incorporate more native plants and less grass, but don't know anything about landscaping, are there local landscapers that specialize in creating or restoring a native landscape?
Well, I'd say get my book. I'd also say, depending on what you're looking for, call Leaf and Limb. We're not landscapers, but we can help you with Piedmont prairies and your trees and your pocket forest. And then in terms of local landscapers, I know there's an increasing cohort of companies out of Durham that are actually taking on the word gardener in their name. And my understanding is that some of them are pretty good. I wish I could point to a great local landscaping company that does this. I'm just not aware of any. And I'm sure other people know some. I know some designers that are really good. Yeah.
Well, and I was just going to put a plug in for some of our programming here at the North Carolina
Yes,
Botanical Garden
definitely.
to learn more, especially Conservation Gardening 101, which is offered each season. And this is Barbara Driscoll from New Hope Audubon. New Hope Bird Alliance.
Thank you. So New Hope Bird Alliance has actually partnered with a number of landscapers who work with native plants, and we have a list on our website. And we also go out to a number of gardening centers and examine them for their practices as far as, do they grow invasives, do they use pesticides, herbicides? And so we have a highly recommended list that do not do any of those things, and then a qualified list. So if you go to our website, newhopebirdalliance.org.
We're all still getting used to it.
Okay, newhopeaudubon.org. We're still switching over. We just changed our name in Maine. We're still working on switching everything. But if you go to our website, you can find those resources for our area.
Yeah. And again, Leaf and Limb, we do Piedmont prairies, pocket forests. We do a lot of this work, but we're not necessarily going to be gardeners per se, and we're not going to tend to your grass. Go ahead. We're going to get 2 more questions, then we're going to move on.
It's not a question. I just wanted to add on to what you were saying. I have found that siding of the trees, it's broke my heart where I've seen giant oak trees in my neighborhood have to be taken down because they're planted so close to the house and the roots got into all of the water systems and everything like that. So siding the tree, knowing what its future growth pattern would be.
The research shows that roots rarely break pipes or foundations. They're usually there because the pipe broke due to micro vibrations or poor installation.
Okay.
Ditto for foundations. Morton Arboretum's done some really good research on this. And what happens is once the pipe's broken, then the trees know that there's water in there and the roots enter. So the plumber comes along, sees the roots, thinks correlation equals causation, not realizing it's really more like a raccoon. They're just in your dumpster looking for delicious food. They didn't actually cause the damage. So trees rarely cause damage to your roots and your foundation. Oh, sorry, your pipes and your foundation.
That's a shame because this is what the tree people are telling.
Some will tell you that, yes. But the research shows otherwise.
But I'm glad to know that, so I can pass that on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Last question, I'm going to move on.
Well, the picture would help. On mulch volcanoes and such, which among other things are a waste of labor. It's my understanding, and I ran the planting of a lot of trees in Durham a long time ago, and they're still living somehow, 46 years. So we did them right. What I understand is there needs to be a space around the base of the trunk of a number of inches. I'm saying 6 or 7 inches. To allow entry of whatever needs to get in there. Is that right?
Not totally. We usually would spec that. Arborists would spec that so as to keep the general public just, but really if you know what the root collar is, which is the base of the tree that flares out into the ground, as long as you just keep that from burying the flare, you're fine. But for the lay person who may not really be able to identify the root collar, we say just keep it a couple inches away. That way you're not going to be on top of it.
So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll move on. So another thing you can do to help address the issues of our this earth, and support birds, promote outrageous diversity of life. There's lots of fun little tricks you can do in your yard. Like, for example, try to keep all your carbon on site. That's the back corner of my yard. I love it. I don't let a shred of carbon leave my property if I can help it. Brush, logs, food scraps from my kitchen, everything goes in the pile. So keep your carbon. Turn off lights at night. This is an actual photo from space. Light pollution affects 25% of the planet right now. That's pretty wild considering oceans are a part of that. I don't know what the terrestrial land is, but this is a lot of light that messes with a lot of creatures. Migrating birds, insects try to fly to the light thinking it's the moon and they exhaust themselves and then they're killed. You'll have mayflies see shiny surfaces on the sidewalk. They think it's water. They'll go lay their eggs on a sidewalk instead of the water. It's really devastating. This is an easy thing we could do. Also, from sort of a municipal planning standpoint, it would save us loads of money if we converted to automatic lights. Also, on a personal level, it's sad that I have to get out to the Sierra Nevadas to see stars. I imagine what life must have been like 500 years ago, where every single night you saw the Milky Way. I think it probably had a way of reminding you of the vastness of the universe. And it's really sad to me that we don't get to see that on a daily basis anymore.
60 years ago.
60 years ago? Yeah. Well, not in my lifetime, I guess I should say. But it's sad, you know?
We always saw the Milky Way any day. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, people who live in cities or near cities, I mean, even now in the suburbs of Chapel Hill, it's still hard to see. You see some stars. Mosquito sprays. Another lecture for another hour. This is just, there's nothing good from mosquito sprays. The research shows they kill about 10% of mosquitoes, but then they kill everything else on your property. They're neurotoxins. They're going to hurt your pets. They're going to hurt your children. As an arborist, I can walk onto a property and I can tell you within a few minutes if they're using mosquito sprays. One of the telltale signs is, for example, a red oak will be just covered in lecanium scale. I know right away they're using mosquito sprays because I know they're killing off all the wasps and the ladybirds and everything else that normally would eat those scale insects. And then the scale insects and the aphids, they explode into populations and then they go on and damage your plants. These little fellers, kitty cats, great, keep inside. Don't let them outside. They kill an extraordinary number of birds every year. the stats in my book, but it's something crazy. Like I want to say 68. You know, Barbara, what is the number?
1 billion.
1 billion, Barbara says. It's a very, very big number of birds being killed by feral cats. Keep your cats inside. And then I don't have a slide for this, but getting rid of invasive plants is also a great way to promote diversity on your property. Get rid of those invasive plants and plant some native plants in their place. If you just get rid of an invasive plant, it's going to come back. You've got to change the conditions. One of the easiest ways to keep invasive plants at bay, and this is not universally true, but it's true for some, many even, you need to fill that space with something else because nature abhors a vacuum. Something is going to want to grow. All right, number 6, and we have only, this is one of the remaining 3. So turf care, it's a lot. It's actually the #1 crop in the US ahead of corn. We grow more grass than we do corn. The grass in the US, if you could put it all next to each other, would be the size of the state of Georgia. We use 1/3 of all publicly available water to irrigate this crop. We use close to 100 million pounds of fertilizers and pesticides. Mowers emit 10 times more emissions than your car. The list goes on and on, all so that, on average, 10% of Americans actually enjoy their yards. So if we're not going to enjoy the space, and we're going to spend all this money and resources cutting it, and all this damage cutting it, why not turn it into a native prairie? Native meadow, whatever you want to call it. These are collections of wild flowers and grasses that grow here. Once established, you really only have to cut once a year. They have deep roots that hold lots of water, build lots of carbon. They feed an unbelievable amount of insects, which is going to be great for all those birds. I've got most of my yard turned into Piedmont prairies and pocket forests, and the kinds of life that I see in there is just wild. Just really incredible. I love these spaces.
When do you recommend mowing it?
The Piedmont prairie, in a perfect world, it would be after all of the stem-dwelling insects leave, which is typically after about 50 degrees soil temperature. Unfortunately, there are HOAs and homes where that's just not feasible, in which case I always recommend at least staging those cuttings on site since many of the creatures will survive in the brush pile. But in a perfect world, it would be after soil temperature peaks beyond 50 degrees. All right, it's easier, it's beautiful, you save money. All the things we're talking about today save you money. I know a lot of people don't enjoy going to mow their grass on a Sunday afternoon. Well, this is a great way not to have to do that. This is a little food web. Just shows sort of how these cascading effects work. We just have 3 plants there showing some of the insects and birds they feed compared to a typical grass species. This graphic, the meadow habitat graphic, it just expands exponentially. So it supports a really big food web, which is great for birds. It's great for life. It's great for building soil, all the rest of it. Similarly, just like a native meadow is a great way to manage a big space. We're working with communities of plants rather than individual plants. And y'all, if you get my book, you're going to see that I advocate doing these prairies from seed. Way easier to manage, way, way easier. If you do plugs, you're going to have to pull weeds for 3 years. Might be good for a small space. You can do that. But if you want to turn big swaths of your yard into Piedmont prairie, you can't do it that way. It's too labor intensive. Similarly, pocket forests do something similar. You work with saplings. Here we're planting one. You can see every single flag is a little sapling that went in the ground. The mic is going in and out. I don't know if that's me or the mic, but hopefully it's okay. And what's really cool is you can put a huge diversity of species in there. This one right here has about 90 different native trees and shrubs. It's way too much, but we just wanted to do it just for fun. I mean, 25 is great. But not too much. I'm saying too much. It's a lot. Do 90 if you want. It's great. You get to see some cool stuff. The beautiful thing is these spaces, again, they save time and money in the long run. You can imagine if you just planted one tree in this space, you'd always have to replenish the mulch and then pull the weeds, or maybe you're somebody who sprays an herbicide, which we want to avoid that if we can. You got to tend to that space around the tree forever. When you do these pocket forests and thickets, as they grow up, there's zero maintenance that needs to be done. When they mature, you're not going to mulch, you're not going to do any composting. You really don't need to do anything at all except for maybe a little pruning around the outer edge. And I'm going to show you some photos that are wild. These are how fast they grow. This is 5 months old. This is the same site. So you see the little pencils there? Those are these little tiny 1-year-old saplings. This is 5 months later. This is 16 months later. And this is 28 months later. It's now 30 feet tall in 2.5 growing seasons. It's absolutely crazy. Plants do better together. Makes sense, right? This is how they evolved and adapted. They can share nutrients. They can do the things that plants do when they hang out. All right, this is a very similar, same concept, but instead of using trees, we're using native shrubs. So you can make a thicket or a hedgerow, as they might call it in the UK. So similar, these went in looking like this, pencil size, 5 months, 16 months, 28 months. There are species, this thing is nearly mature after 2.5 growing seasons. It's remarkable. So you're getting massive diversity. You're getting soil being built at a record speed. You're getting tons of different plants to feed lots of different birds and insects. You're getting very fast growth rates. It's really a remarkable system. And the best part is these are maintenance free. The only thing we'll do on these is maybe prune the edges if the client wants. And you'd have to do that with a single tree anyway. All right, last one, and then we're going to go to questions. Last thing is grow trees with friends. This is a great way to help. We have a nonprofit here locally called Project Pando. We work with staff and the community to collect native seeds. We plant them in these boxes that have these open mesh things on the bottom. It's called landscape cloth. And when the seeds sprout, their roots go down, they poke out of the bottom of the box, and it's air. They stop growing. Now they start growing laterally. And after about a year, it produces these young saplings with the beautiful root systems that I was showing you earlier. If I were to go all the way back to those early photos of the saplings, they were all from a scenario like this. It's so easy to do. You can do this with your friends. You can do it with your neighborhood. You can do this with Project Panda if you want to come to Raleigh and join us. We have a lot of people actually, probably in this room, I see several, who work with us on Project Panda. It's a lot of fun. It's a really good way also to get free plant material, work with your friends, hang out, watch trees grow, sort seeds. Here's a seed sorting party. It was good times. It's just a lot of fun, and then we give these away for free. And you can do the same, or you can use them. The wonderful thing about native plants is they're everywhere around us. You can go and collect seeds with permission if it's not your property, and you can raise them up and use them or give them away. So questions on, actually I'm going to wrap it right now because this is essentially the final slide. The promise of this journey is you can do these things. You can save time and money, you can find joy, and you can help heal Earth. It's really an amazing win-win-win. And to finish it off, if you want to get a copy of the book, we're giving away the digital book for free, and we're giving away the hard copy book simply for the price of printing. You can get it all here, and then we have a newsletter we do once a month where we only teach. Do we have time for more questions, or is that it?
We're at the end of our
We're at the
hour.
end.
We'll
Oh,
pass
man.
that. So I will, if you're willing to stay.
I'll
sure.
stay,
Okay,
definitely.
great. So folks, hold your questions, and Basil will be here. And as I mentioned earlier, he can sell the books via cash here, or you can pick it up in our garden shop later today and on forward. So
Can I
please join.
stay mic'd up and answer questions, or do you want me to do it like one-on-one?
If we could do one-on-one, that would be great.
Okay, perfect.
And we'll thank you everybody for being here. Thanks for joining us on Zoom today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Basil. Appreciate our connection with Leaf and Land so much. So